Hello again. I'm Dr. Lois Dodds from Heartstream Resources. This session we're going to look into universal human needs and what that has to say to us about member care, and then some dimensions of development. But I brought my globe today because, when we look at our world, so many countries, just in Africa alone, over 50. I think there's somewhere around 200. And we know over 5,000 languages. So we can get overwhelmed and think, oh my goodness, I can never learn enough about culture. How can I cope? How can I be a good ambassador? How can I be a good representative of Jesus? So understanding universal human needs is really important. Because if we start there, it doesn't feel so intimidating to think about how we're going to learn about cultures. Now, this is a wonderful tool. I really recommend it for your family, for your team, put in the office. We discovered it a few years ago, and our grandkids love it. So not only is it a globe, but there's a stylus, and if you keep the batteries up to date, the stylus will tell you many things. You can touch a country, it'll tell you the capital. You can say, well, if I'm going from California over to Korea, how many miles would that be? Oh, wow, it's cool. There's so many wonderful things this globe can do. I recommend just keeping it handy, and whenever you have a chance to talk, especially with children, but even as adults, use this as a resource to remind us, yes, the world is big. There are many countries, many cultures, many languages, but humans have universal needs. So we want to look at those in this session. We are looking at the prospect of universal human needs. We can be afraid when we think of how many cultures there are. Like this person, now I have dolls from all over the world. When we look at all the costumes and the different languages, it's easy to be intimidated and think, oh, I could never know about so many. How can I be effective? So we might look at this person and we say, well, I'm much too different. Maybe we look at this lady and we say, well, she sweeps her house and I sweep mine. Maybe I could relate to her. I'll never be able to carry fruit on my head like she does. So we can be afraid sometimes of culture. We think there's so much, it's too complicated. If we remember that every human being on the planet has the same inner needs, that our real human needs are the same, we don't need to feel intimidated by the culture. Or maybe we say, this beautiful person plays the flute, wears handmade clothing. Isn't it beautiful? But I could never be like that. How could I relate to that person? We'll be able to do it if we remember the universal human needs. This guy and this lady, they need to be loved and respected. So this guy, he looks a lot different from us, and he may just be wearing simple clothing. He looks like a wizened old man, but his need is the same, to be respected. So we could sit under a tree and talk with him and know that his need for love and respect is the same as ours, though we might show it differently. Now, my Russian dolls illustrate something a little different, but it's true of us universally. When we go to this kind of doll and we open it, lo and behold, there's a smaller one inside. Maybe some of you own a doll like this. So here's the papa maybe, and here's the mama. And we look at her and say, there's more to her than meets the eye. And look, there's another one inside of her. And maybe this is baby Joe, but we say, there's more to him than meets the eye. Let's see. Oh, look at that. Sure enough. You see, so inside of each of these, there's a smaller person. So I learned this teaching children one day. They wanted to know about emotions. And I was explaining to them that inside each of us as a big person, there's a smaller person. Maybe this Papa is 30. But inside of him, there's a boy who used to be 20, and another boy who was 10. and another one who was once just 3 or 4. So when we think about our emotions and our need to be loved and our need to be respected, here's what's important that the dolls help us learn. When I interact with the man, it's not just the man, it's all the persons inside of him, his different selves at different ages. So maybe when he was just this age, his father ran away and left his mother, and he's always felt abandoned. And nothing healed that, and so at this age, he still feels abandoned, and no one helped him, and he still feels abandoned. And then when he got to be a teenager, a young man, he made some big decisions. I'm not going to ever love anyone because they might run away and leave me. So the little boy and the bigger boy inside shape who the young man is becoming. And then when that young man does get married and he has children, he has trouble loving them. So where does his emotion come from? All the way back. All those selves that are inside of him. Now, every person we know has a history. We don't know what the history is. But when we meet the adult, we say, he was shaped or she was shaped by all these things in the past. And what this person really needs is to be loved, to be accepted, to be cared about. Now, if they're Russian, I might have to learn to speak that language in order to best describe how I love them. But you know what? A smile, a hug when it's appropriate, a gift. Those are all ways that we begin to address the universal human need, whatever the person has as a language or a culture, whichever one of these costumes they're wearing. If we understand these basic principles, it's not so scary to think that we're going to go live in different cultures or maybe move to many, because we understand what people need no matter what their culture is. I remember learning this myself. The first time I went to teach, I think I went to Hong Kong, and I was a bit intimidated to think, I don't know much about Chinese culture. What I did know, I liked. But I remember the wonderful discovery that there are extroverted Chinese and there are introverted Chinese. Our stereotype is they're all very quiet. In fact, some are very outgoing. And it's like, oh, we have more in common than we do difference if we understand this. So here we're going to look at these universal needs. What are people's needs, humans of all cultures? What are some major theories about human development? Now, the theories are theories, they're ideas, they're not facts, but we can extrapolate and go into different cultures and say the same needs exist, they just might be met differently. What is relevant to us in member care by looking at these theories? Looking again at how our dimensions of development interact. They're always interacting. However you define it or describe it, always interaction. What are the factors that shape who you are? What are the factors that have shaped me? That's part of that self-knowledge. Because I want to be able to say, oh, I know who I am and I know how I got to be this way. Most people never answer that question. Most people never even bother to ask the question, who am I? How did I get to be who I am? And then if I know the answer to that, it's like, now what is God's purpose for me in the world? So our universal human needs, as far as I've ever been able to detect, no matter where we grow up, what culture or language or country, we want to be loved. We want to be accepted. We want to be sheltered, and we want to be safe. Now, today's social media phenomenon has really undermined some of these questions, especially for kids and teenagers who spend too much time on social media because of bullying and just ugly stuff. They lose their sense of who they are, and they can really blur reality with internet stuff. So we want to know, am I loved? If not, why not? Am I accepted? Am I sheltered? Am I safe? Now, the shelter might be an igloo or a tent, a goatskin tent. It might be a house. but people, who shelters me as people? Family, extended family, tribe, ethnic group, and am I safe? Now, culture, remember, there's thousands of them because every language carries at least one culture. Some languages carry many cultures. So thousands of cultures are what define how these are met and the expectations. I was up in an Eskimo village some years ago with a very dear friend. I spent quite a bit of time up there where it was so cold you could actually see ice crystals in the air. But I had to learn a few things. If I asked a question, where is such and such, they'd go, they didn't answer me. Would you like to come for dinner? Didn't answer me. You see, now, they were being very polite. Their culture was defining politeness. I didn't know what it was. I expected words, and I got gestures. So culture is the answer to how am I loved? Who loves me? How am I loved? Am I accepted? So that's why we have the challenge of learning about culture, because we want to say, well, in one culture, a gesture might mean something, another culture means something different. So we want to understand the difference, but we realize people have the same need. Now, in our culture, you might do this gesture, come on over, or to a kid, come here. In some places, that would be an offense. Some places, you tap children on the head, it's really offensive. We do that all the time. See, we want to show the child is loved and accepted, but how it's done in the other culture might be different. So I think if you keep this in mind, it makes it easier to sort out this question of, if I'm going into another culture, I definitely want to love and accept people, but I have to learn how to do it. We need to have sustenance. Now again, sustenance is nurture, it's food. Physical food, emotional food, spiritual food. We want to be respected and esteemed. We want to know other people think we have value. We want to have meaning. But of course, how that question is answered is different in another language. And you all know we use the term norm, or a norm, is what would be normal in a given society, in a given culture. And so what's normal as a way of expressing need to us might not be the same way that someone else defines it. I notice when Americans go abroad, there's a stereotype about them that they're loud and they're often sort of self-aggrandizing. Americans are more used to speaking about themselves in positive ways. Well, in some cultures, that really is not accepted. Well, what does the person want? To be esteemed. How they get the esteem is different. And language shapes our meaning. So even in the process of learning the other language, we're going to be reshaping our thinking and our understanding. But hopefully it helps us learn how to fit better into that culture so we can communicate that we love and care. Now, Maslow was a psychologist in the 50s. I loved it when I discovered his work. I was in my early 20s, and I discovered his work, and I thought it was very, very helpful. Up to that point, psychology was mostly learned from unhealthy people. You know, why did Freud have the theories he did? Because he was always dealing with sick people. So when you deal with sick people, you develop theories about sick people. So I like Maslow because he said, you know what? Let's study healthy people and find out. So I want to give you one example of his work and show how it can help us. So he became widely known in the 50s and 60s because his psychology was different. It was based on human development, his observation of human needs. And his theory, as every other theory, describes what's observable and is an attempt to make sense of it. Now, you and I as humans, we always want to make sense. That is just our nature. We try to make sense out of everything. To the extent that we can do that, we feel satisfied that we've figured something out. So his observation of people and their needs led him to this theory, a way to make sense of it. So I want you to know his work. And again, in your class handouts, in your reader, you'll have illustrations of his work. Now, the relevance of theories, Maslow's and some others, is that they're one of the building blocks in our understanding of people. So if I have a theory of development, that every culture is going to have some way to mark when kids turn from kids into adults. Now, it might be surprising to know that most cultures don't have teenagers. That's a new phenomenon in the last 100 years. Almost always in history and in most cultures and countries, you went from being a child to an adult, maybe even in one ceremony. Bar mitzvah, for instance. You're a boy today and tomorrow you're a man. So this phenomenon of being a teenager is actually pretty new. If I know theories of development, I can tell you where that came from. And I could say in most of the jungle groups that we worked with, there was no such thing as being a teenager. At 14, usually around 14, if you could demonstrate you were a good hunter, you could build your shelter, you're a man, and now you can have a wife by whatever means the society provides. Okay, so our knowledge of theories is like more building blocks in our awareness of people and how we're going to be able to help them. Now, Maslow proposed that people have different levels of need. So as we look at this, I want you to ask yourself the question, are any of these relevant to the gospel? Are they relevant to your life in missions? Are they relevant to your life in humanitarian work? How might they relate? So his theory is that each level of need is important, but you have to start at the bottom. If you're going to start at the bottom, then physiology, water, sleep, those basic things that keep our life going, he said that's where we start. We have to satisfy that need, he says, in order to become even aware of the next need, safety and security. So think back to the earthquake in Haiti. All of this was disrupted, and people were, and still are, from the recent floods, water. Now, where would you go for clean water? If suddenly everything's destroyed, the sewage system is destroyed and the water system, and so something as basic as clean water to drink, it's a basic need. If that need is not satisfied, we're going to spend all our time trying to get it. Same with food, with sleep. Once we have that need met, we can think, well, now I better have some shelter from the rain, and I better have something around me to guard me from the robbers who are going to come by and take advantage. And then when that need is met, Maslow's theory is that now we become aware of our need to belong to other people. Primarily that's going to be the family, but it may be friends or, in our case, church. So when that need is satisfied, now I have a safe place, I'm secure, I know who I am and where I belong. Then my ego needs, or my need to be esteemed. Who am I? Am I the big man? Am I the career woman? I won't really think about that until these other needs are met. Now, he says, when you've gotten to be somebody and you know who you are in terms of esteem and recognition, and you've got a reputation, then you begin to think about, well, how could I become the best me? How can I be fulfilled? How can I actualize or make real my potential? We begin to think about justice and truth, wisdom and meaning. When that's working out, we really long for knowledge and understanding. And then his peak experience, what he put at the top, is our love of beauty, aesthetics. Now, Maslow also came up with a term called a peak experience. the peak up there. And he said there are times when we feel very much at one with God or with nature, watching the sunrise, the sunset, the ocean, those feelings of beauty. Now for me, one of my lifelong questions is, I haven't got the answer yet, but why is there pain in beauty? Any of you experience that? Beauty is so powerful. There's a certain pain in it. I have a hunch it might be related to the image of God, but I'm not sure. So anyway, he had these 7 levels. Now, most of the time when it's presented and taught, people knocked off the top, and so they only present 6. But this was his original. Now, when is the gospel relevant? Is there any one level that you can think the gospel is most relevant to?
It's relevant to all of them.
Huh?
It's relevant to all of them.
Oh, I like that, Carol. It's relevant to all of them. I agree. Now, if you want someone to know that you are there in their country, learning their language, because there's a God who loves them and you want to love, where would you start with those people? Jennifer?
The physiological, who start at the bottom, provide for their needs.
Okay, you start with what's logical, where their need is?
Physiological, she said.
Oh, did you?
Physiological.
Oh, physiological, sorry.
Can you say
Okay.
the question again?
Okay, so the question is, you go to this other country, you're learning the language. Your motivation is to learn to know these people, to love them, so they can find out that God loves them. Where would you start with them in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, given that your motivation is for them to discover who God is?
You would maybe start where they left off. So if they are in need of the most basic, you would help them to be able to, because if you started at a too high level, then they wouldn't be able to understand.
Ah, excellent, Rachel. That's very good insight. Exactly right. We start with people pretty much where they are, and then we say there's more beyond. Now, if I went to help in the earthquake in Haiti, I'm going to talk about self-actualization. It's wasted. It's not relevant. People need water and they need food. The tsunami in Asia, same thing. Everything is washed away. So you don't go in and start talking about, you need to have good self-esteem. You need to have a solid ego. It's like, no, I just want to know where's my child who washed away in the storm. See, so we have to say what is relevant to these individuals and perhaps even this culture. Where is the need that they feel? Because that's what's going to be most relevant. And then we come into their lives at that level, and we can also help them to boost them up. Do you know a best way to avoid maternal death and high mortality of babies? It's proved in Africa now, but it's working in other countries. There's one thing you can do nationally to reduce infant mortality and maternal mortality. You can do it for about $10 a month. Any of you read these studies? Another wonderful book called Half the Sky comes from a Chinese proverb that women hold up half the sky. And this book is written by a husband-author team documenting all kinds of really important changes in the world. But if you're in Africa and your girls are going to get married at 10, maybe 6, maybe 10 if they're lucky, or 12, now, when they marry at that age and they're going to get pregnant with probably their first menses, their bodies are not developed. Their hips are actually not big enough for pregnancy or to deliver a child. So when a girl marries that young, she's likely to have a stillbirth, or her baby will get very damaged in birth, and the girl herself, who's barely adolescent, will have trouble. Now, if your parent says, I'll take $10 a month from you, sponsor, if I'll let my girl stay in school for $10 a month. Will you pay me $10 a month? Sure. We pay out $10 a month to the parents, and they say, we're happy to let our girl stay in school. We don't need her to go get married yet because we can still afford her with $10 a month. So $10 a month is about what it takes for a girl to stay in school longer. And then maybe she won't get married till 14 or 15, at which point her body is much more ready to bear a baby. So these solutions to these needs start very basic, and we can intervene. All of our organizations exist to intervene in the world, right? Change something bad into something good. So read that book, Half the Sky. Okay, so we want to intervene as a mission at the level of need. Now, the same thing is true for the individual. So let's suppose one of your members, there's a car accident, and suddenly, instead of a family of 5, you have a family of 2. Well, don't worry about talking about beauty and going back to school. It's like not relevant. Start where they are. You have to rebuild. Now, he's the one that we credit with the term self-actualization. When this first became popular in the 60s and 70s, a lot of Christians said, no, we don't want to be self-actualized, that's too worldly. And so people came up with the term, which I like, Christ-actualized. In other words, it's Christ in me as a Christian that enables me to become who I am. It's not that I'm doing it myself. Now, people who criticize it really didn't understand the term, but they just thought it sounded selfish. Now, we want to develop ourself in a positive, healthy way. You cannot live without a self. What you don't want is to exercise the wrong aspect of yourself. Now, his theory also relates to levels of need, not stages. So let's go back to that a minute. These are not stages of development. These are levels of need. Now, if you read the story of Corrie ten Boom or other heroes of the faith, you can find something fascinating because that love and belonging and esteem are there that comes from God. People in dire, destitute conditions can actually thrive because they've learned God's love is so solid they can endure the loss of other things. I have a friend, a lady who was here. She works in one of the most dangerous prisons in the world. She's always getting death threats. So I said to her one day, how do you cope? Aren't you afraid? She said, no, I have a great roommate. I said, but don't you worry about people breaking into your apartment? She said, no, my bodyguard is fantastic. I said, tell me about him. Well, his name is Jesus. She said, oh, well, Jesus is my roommate. Jesus is my bodyguard. Now, that enables her to go into very dangerous situations and be very calm. Same thing with another couple that work in a very dangerous prison in the Philippines. One prison they work in has 13,000 inmates. It's actually the prison where the terrorists were taken who captured the missionaries. So these terrorists have come into that prison. Some of them become Christians because in the prison now, through this couple, there are now hundreds of Christians, churches, Bible studies, and pastoral training. But you see, they tell me that when they're in the prison working, they feel safer than when they're out on the street, which is really amazing. That same faith that says, God's got me covered. So we can be in dire situations and still have, confidence, and we know that we are loved and that God will take care of us. So remember, Maslow is not stages of development, but levels of need. So what we want to look at is how Maslow's work or his description intersects with the gospel. Can God meet people at every level? And then how is this fact relevant to member care? Those who serve around the world and we ourselves. Okay, when I'm feeling like I don't have purpose in life, I just simply need to go back to God. Say, God gives me purpose. Whatever need I'm feeling, God will meet it for me. And when I'm intervening in other people's life, I need to intervene where their level of need is. So we're going to look at several theories of development. These are all stage theories, and what that means is you start at one level and you progress to other levels, or usually higher levels. So Piaget, you've probably learned about him if you studied anything in the field of education. We'll see an illustration of that. Erik Erikson is the most well-known for what we call psychosocial development. Now, if you only went to a Bible school in some countries, you may never heard of this stuff. But if you've gone to a university with a broader offering of courses, you probably have some acquaintance with this. So psychosocial means our social emotional well-being. Two men I want you to know about, Robert Coles and Lawrence Kohlberg, who are particularly known for their theories of moral development. Let me just ask you, is every Christian truly moral? Can Christians be morally undeveloped? I think so. What about ethical? Now, is every missionary you know ethical? Same problem. Just because you've become a Christian and believer in Jesus, it doesn't automatically promote you to a high level of development. You're going to have to go through a process, which is what my dissertation was about. But when we look at stage theories, some others I want you to be acquainted with are James Fowler. He did a lot of theorizing and study of spiritual life, but across religions, because he wanted to see if different religions had the same kind of process of development, okay? And then James Olthius, who is a psychologist, an ethicist, a theologian, he did the same but related to Christians. Now, in your readers, you're going to find a whole section with articles by each of these people. And then my own work regarding our development through the Holy Spirit. So we'll look just briefly. I wish we had a lot more time this week to study each of these in depth, because each one is so fascinating. But we're going to settle now for just at least an acquaintance. And then on your own, you can read their books or read the articles about them. So what do the theories have in common? Well, most are stage-related. Most are age-related, okay? Not all of them are, but mostly they say, when you get to be about this age, this happens, and about this age, this happens, and about this age, this happens. But then we'll look at moral development, and we'll see you can be little and have a high level of development. Now, what the theorists also say is that every stage has both a negative or a positive potential, and it's crisis where you hit that node that moves you up or keeps you at a plateau. I should have brought my bamboo today, because you know in bamboo, like many grasses, it grows up straight and then there's a node. So we might have this much. Our bamboo in Peru would grow 4 inches a day. Our kids would put a tuna can on it and watch it grow. It grew that fast, and it was about this big. But whatever dimension, every so often there's a node. Now in Greek, that's a thlipsis. How do you like that word? Thlipsis. Okay. So the thlipsis is like a crisis in our lives. So we grow, and then a crisis promotes either moving to the next stage or getting stuck. So we can become positive through that crisis or more negative. Without crisis, according to these theorists, we do not grow. So is it good to have a crisis? Yeah, if we see its potential in our growth and what it does for us developmentally, we don't have to be afraid of crisis. Now, we don't want too many and too fast, but in itself, a crisis promotes growth. But we all know some people get stuck. And few persons reach full maturity. To me, this is the sad part. If you figure that when we have Christ in our world, we have all the resources God gives us, and some of us just stay the same. Isn't that sad? Some people sit in the pew for 50 years. They haven't changed. They haven't grown. They either got more negative or just stayed the same. So just because we're in a developmental theory and we look at it and we say crisis can help us grow, it doesn't mean it happens to everybody. So each of these has a different thing to say about when the stages happen and what they represent, but they all agree we need a crisis to precipitate growth. Now, Piaget, you would have studied if you studied early childhood development and so on. So these are just examples. Again, we're not going to go into detail because we don't have enough time. But, the baby's learning certain things, crawling about, being able to stand up, get a hold of things, taste the world. So that's a very important stage of development. They found that kids who never crawl have a harder time walking later. And then the child starts, getting past a year or two old and develops some other cognitive skills. So Piaget is really about our mental cognitive development. Here's a couple examples. The child learns to think abstractly, usually around 7 or 8. And so here's the parent saying, look, he's been struck by lightning. And then this little guy, he's learning math. And what is math? It's a concept. Now, if you educate your children in something like Montessori school, a wise teacher gives them little sticks or something to illustrate how many is how many. But most of us learn math very abstractly. You can't do that before you're developmentally ready. And then Erickson, psychosocial. What is in my psyche, which is my soul and my thinking, and my emotion and my social life. Now, this illustrates a family. We are all born into some kind of family, and that's where we learn the most basic trust, the most important things we'll ever take. There's a book called Everything I Really Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Well, actually, we learn most of it before we ever get to kindergarten. Do I punch you, or do I hug you? Do I scream at you, or do I hug you? I was sitting in the beauty shop just a couple months ago, and this little girl I've never seen, her name, I know her name, I learned her name immediately. She sat and chatted with me half an hour. Precious girl, 5 years old, very smart. And she just moved here, and she didn't know where they came from, but her mother had died, and her daddy's going to get married again, and she doesn't get to be in the wedding. She doesn't get to get her hair done for the wedding, and she doesn't get to have a special dress for the wedding. And we just had this amazing conversation, and I pray for her every day now. But what she's already learning? She doesn't matter very much in that new family that's forming. I felt so sad for her, and I really have prayed for her every day. But I did find out she has 3 grandmothers, and she said one of them is just, I don't like to be with her. I said, why? She always yells at me. She screams at me. Oh, I said, I am so sorry. Nobody should treat you that way. You deserve respect. Respect? What's that? I said, well, you deserve for someone to talk to you nicely. So I said, well, let me give you a little secret. Someday when you're talking to your grandma, you could say to her, Grandma, could I tell you something I've learned? Oh, sure. What's that, little kid? Well, Grandma, I have learned I feel so much better. I feel more loved if you don't yell at me. Now, this is a lot to pack into half an hour with a 5-year-old, but it's like, I may never see her again, and I haven't. It's been 2 months now. Anyway, so I said, you could say to your grandmother, I feel more love from you if you don't yell at me. Now, that's a really basic thing. Not only can she learn that at 5, but she could actually teach it to someone else. Mm-hmm. See, so our psychosocial development, it's just beginning immediately. Actually, I believe it goes before birth, but clearly at birth, it's beginning. My husband's public health department, the nurses were wonderful. And here's something they developed. They developed a way to tell right there in the delivery room in the first few minutes which mothers would be neglectful and deprive their children or neglect them. And they figured out, you can tell it in just a few minutes. And if they saw certain things, they put that baby and mommy on an intervention list. And here's how you do it. Now, you'll all understand if you've been parents. You get that little baby straight from the womb. The doctor or nurse usually puts baby, wrap it up, put it in your face, in your arms. When you begin to talk to that baby and you make eye contact, incredible things happen. Your whole body and even your brain and the baby's brain is flooded with certain hormones, bonding. And you look at those tiny fingers and you say, oh, she's beautiful. Oh, isn't it amazing? He's just perfect. And you count the little toes and the fingers. And, that's a good sign. The nurse says, this mom and baby, they're going to be fine. But here's what happens, especially teenage mothers who've not been nurtured. They take the baby, wrap it in the blanket. It lays beside the mother. Mother doesn't talk to it. Mother doesn't touch it. She's not curious in unwrapping it to look at it. That's the signal in the first 10 minutes. This mom doesn't know how to bond with her baby. Now, as nurses, they said, we're going to start intervening right away, instantly. All right, Mommy, let me show you. Here's this new precious life. Now, I want you to put the baby up and look into the baby's eyes. I want you to look at these precious little fingers, and I want you to talk to this baby. Now, this is still in the delivery room, but they learned to do intervention based on those signs that a mother didn't know how to bond. So psychosocial happens very, very early. One of the tragedies that has happened as a lot of people from developed countries have adopted babies, especially from Romania. It happened with a lot of the Romanian children and some other orphanages, that those children have been adopted by very loving parents, but they have perpetual trouble because those children did not learn any bonding early enough. They were just sort of treated as objects, fed or diapered. During the Second World War, the term was described to actually describe those babies that wouldn't make it. They couldn't thrive, didn't have human connection. Marasmus, you might have heard of that term. Babies who die, they're healthy physically, but no emotional care, so they would die. So psychosocial is very crucial. Now, you will not necessarily know anybody's beginnings on your team or in your organization. One of the things you can do is get to know the individuals. Tell me your story. Tell me about your family. And if a person had a very healthy beginning, you're going to discover they're a healthier person, even if they've been through trauma and hardship, because they've got resilience built into them. So this is very crucial. Psychosocial. Erik Erikson wrote many wonderful books on these, and some of that information is in your reader.